The role of the king is something much maligned in our modern society. It is often seen by many people as a synonym for tyrant or dictator. But what we see in our ancient myths is a very different idea of the king. It is a king that is a representation of celestial order. It is a king that is a divine connection between men and the gods. It is a king who upholds truth, honor, justice, who obeys the laws and does not make them, who must always conform to the truth, and who holds utmost responsibility not only for the successes of the community, but all of its failings. And this includes things like droughts or natural disasters. If these things happen under his watch, it is because he has failed in some way. He has lied. He has cheated in something. He has made an unjust judgment. He has allowed some evil to go unchecked. He has in some way neglected his duties as the divine organizer of the society, and therefore he has been punished by the punishing of the entire community. This is an immense responsibility, and often we see representations of this specifically laid out very clearly in Celtic myths of kings. And it is very rare, very, very rare, that any king in Celtic society is depicted as living to the end of his rule and dying peacefully. Almost every single king faces some kind of crisis and is either unwillingly breaks his contract with the gods and is killed for it. I believe it is correct to say and correct to view the king as a kind of high priest. He is fulfilling a purely divine function. And to see him just as a military leader or some kind of tyrant that oppresses the people through a strong hand is entirely incorrect. While he is often responsible for leading military excursions for the defense of the community, for the expansion of the community, this is not his fundamental role, it's simply part of it. Because the king is responsible for the totality of the society, for every single thing. And ultimately, as a divine representation of the king of the gods, just as the king of the gods rules the celestial realm and organizes the entire cosmos, this the king must do in his community. Now, there are many examples from this in Irish mythology, but one of the best and one of the most well-known, Connery, and he is the son of Lug. Now, it doesn't expressly say this, but you can garner this from an analysis of the tale. But what we're most interested with Connery is the description, the very lovely description that is given of him in the destruction of Daderga's hostel. And I'll read it out to you because it's fundamental. I saw an apartment, the most beautifully decorated one in the house, with hangings and ornaments of silver, and 3 men in it, said Inkel. The men on either side were fair, with their flaxen hair and their cloaks. They were as white as snow, and their cheeks blushed pleasingly. Between them a callow youth, with the ardor and deeds of a lord, and the advice of a seer. The cloak he wore was like mist on the first day of summer. Its color and appearance changed from moment to moment, and each color was lovelier than the one before. Moreover, there was a wheel of gold in the front of his cloak, and it reached from his chin to his navel. His hair was the color of refined gold. Of all the forms I have seen in the world, his is the most beautiful. At his side there was a gold-hilted sword. A hand's length of it was visible, and the light reflected from that part of the sword would enable a man out in front of the house to discern a flesh worm. sweeter the music of that sword than the sweet sound of the golden pipes that drone in the royal house. Now this is only the first part of the description, but we're going to break it down here. So first of all, this is fundamentally a celestial and primarily a solar figure. He's decked out in gold, he's colored in gold, his sword is basically like the sun, and he's wearing a golden wheel that's like as big as half of the torso of his body. Let's face it, it's a golden wheel, it is embodying the sun. And so this is a solar figure, almost unmistakably. But moreover, he is wise, he is a seer, he's got battle ardor, but he's also youthful. And it should be said that there's no physical way that Conor O'More at this point in the story could be youthful in actuality, because he was said to have ruled for like 20 years or something, and so he would have been middle-aged at best, if not older. But what they're laying out is not a physical description of a human being. They're laying out the description of the god that he's embodying. This is not a human description of a real person. This is an idealized description of him representing a god. And that god, of course, is Lugh, the god of kings. Now it goes on. This is what I said upon seeing him, Inkel continued. I see a lofty noble reign, and a noisy flowering that blooms with an abundant spring tide. A furious ardor of fair forms is assembled. I see a noble restrained king who rules by right and by consent, from partition to wall. I see the diadem of a fair prince, proper to the dignity of a ruling lord, a gleam of light his lordly countenance. I see his two shining cheeks as white and glistening and nobly hued as snow. His two eyes are blue-gray and brighter than hyacinth. Firm his brow between a hedge of black eyelashes. I see a crown encircling his head, the color of beautiful gold over his yellow curly hair. I see his cloak, red, multi-hued, of excellent braided silk. I see a huge brooch ornamented with gold that shines with the vigor of the full moon. I see a circle of crimson gems in a bowl-like cluster, beautiful his head between his straight bright shoulders. I see a tunic of splendid linen, silken its sheen, refracted and many-colored its hue. A grazing for the eye of the multitude this man. He maintains justice amongst his people. He delivers from the enemy. Braided silk ornamented with gold from ankle to knee. I see his sword, its hilt ornamented with gold, in its scabbard of white silver. The latter, with its 5 concentric circles, retains its excellence. I see his bright, lime-whitened shield overhead. It scorns throngs of enemies. His spear of sparkling gold would illuminate a feast, and its shaft is of ornamented gold. His right hand that wards off is the hand of a king. He raises his spear firmly, as a king would, twisting its stiffness. 300 perfect men about this generous king he overtakes like a scald crow in battle, in the sorrowful hostel. And then Fair Rogan said, Not difficult that. Indeed, it is not a moon without a king. The most splendid and distinguished and handsome and powerful king who has ever come into the world, that one. The kindest and gentlest and most humble as well. Conor O'More, son of Eterskella, is his name, and he is the High King of Eru. There is no flaw in him, not as to form or shape or clothing or size or arrangement or proportion or eye or hair or whiteness or wisdom or pleasingness or eloquence or weapons or equipment or attire or splendor or abundance or dignity or bearing or prowess or ancestry. Great the youth of this man, who seems simple and sleepy until he undertakes a feat of arms. But if his ardor and fury are aroused while the Fianna of Eru and Albu are about him in his house, then there will be no destruction of the hostel. Now, there are many things that we can learn from this description of Connery. One of them is that the king is not an autocratic, oppressive ruler. The ideal of the king is someone who is humble, who is kind, who is wise, and who is just and right and upholds these values above everything. When he must engage in combat, he does so with battle fury as his guide. But this is not his first recourse. This is not even the fundamental of his power. Rather, his real power is in eloquence, is in speech, is in wisdom, and is in maintaining the holy order of the gods within the community. Now, for an example of what the reign of the king, the ideal king, looked like, there was great bounty then in Conera's reign. 7 ships being brought to Inverculpa in June of every year, acorns up to the knee every autumn, an abundance over the buas and the bowing each June, and an abundance of peace, so that no one slew his neighbor anywhere in Erin, rather that neighbors' voices seemed as sweet as the strings of harps. From the middle of spring to the middle of autumn, no gust of wind stirred any cow's tail. There was no thunder, no stormy weather in Conera's reign. So this is very far from the idea of a military ruler. This is someone who maintains peace, order, and prosperity. It is not someone who is engaging in endless wars. It is not someone who is inherently violent by their nature. In fact, Conera's undoing is when he is forced by circumstances to engage in military conflict. And so the Geash that bind Conera, that bind every king, that were set by the Druids in order to help establish divine rule over the kings, to ensure that the kings were subjugated to the powers of the gods. He is forced into breaking these Geash one after another, and this is his undoing, and it leads to his death. But he is multi-talented, so when it comes to battle, he is also the leader of battle, and the most powerful of the warrior. So fundamentally, the king has to embody the perfect human being. He has to be perfection itself. He has to be everything. It's an impossible task to live up to, and often why these kings don't live very long, because they uphold these principles. But once they do not, then they become the scapegoat as well. They become the one on the sacrificial block. Because if something has gone wrong in the community, they are the one responsible, and so they are the one to pay the price. And so the ideal of the king then is not as an autocratic ruler. It is very much a sacred position. It is the equivalent of high priest. So he is a sacred priestly function who is guiding the society through his connection to the gods. And so when the king or queen of modern day Britain is also connected to the church, this is actually very in line with actual tradition. Now, the modern monarchy is something completely different, but this idea that the monarch is sort of the embodiment of the gods is absolutely historic. Now, initially, what had thrown me is this comment relating to the moon, where Ferrogan says, "Indeed, it is not a moon without a king." And this made me initially think, well, then he is some sort of lunar deity, but that doesn't match up with all the gold that is seemingly symbolic of the sun. And also how he has a gold brooch which supposedly shines with the vigor of the full moon, right? So there's this lunar thing also involved here, but it seems more likely that this figure is in fact just an embodiment of cosmic light. So that he is not specifically the god of the physical sun, nor is he the god of the physical moon, but he is light in general. And I think it very likely that the Celts realized, as did the ancient Greeks, very early on, they realized that the light of the moon is generated by the sun. And so really, when it says that there is no moon without a king, it's saying that without the sun, there isn't a moon. But as I said, it's primarily also that the sun is representative of something else as well. It's representative of light and representative of the cosmic order. It seems likely that the cosmic order was seen as forming around the sun. And this seems to be explained also in descriptions of the house of Conhovar. Now let's take a quick look at a Greek example from Hesiod's The Theogony. This is one of the oldest Greek works other than the Iliad, and see what it has to say about the role and connection of the kings or princes, as he refers to them as. Now this is in reference to the role of the Muses, the daughters of Zeus. For she attends on worshipful princes, whomever of heaven-nourished princes the daughters of great Zeus honor, and behold him at his birth. They pour sweet dew upon his tongue, and from his lips flow gracious words. All the people look towards him, while he settles causes with true judgments, and he, speaking surely, would soon make wise end even of a great quarrel. For therefore are the princes wise in heart, because when the people are being misguided in their assembly, they set right the matter again with ease, persuading them with gentle words. And when he passes through a gathering, they greet him as a god with gentle reverence, and he is conspicuous amongst the assembled. Such is the holy gift of the Muses to men, for it is through the Muses and far-shooting Apollo that there are singers and harpers upon the earth, but princes are of Zeus, and happy is he whom the Muses love. Sweet flows speech from his mouth. For though a man may have sorrow and grief in his newly troubled soul, and live in dread because his heart is distressed, yet when a singer, the servant of the Muses, chants the glorious deeds of men of old and the blessed gods who inhabit Olympus, at once he forgets his heaviness, and remembers not his sorrow at all, but the gifts of the goddesses soon turn him away from these. Here we have another example that the kings or princes were not viewed as being heavy-handed rulers that simply through the force of some sort of organized military class were able to oppress the people, and through their martial prowess were able to win over the masses through force. It is quite the opposite. Instead, their power is seen as being primarily through speech, through their elegance, through their eloquence, through their masterful way of convincing people of their ideas and guiding people with their speech in assemblies. And we should also note, of course, that Lug was called the first to convene assemblies, and that he's often connected with speech and poetry and law and so on, because these are the things of the king. So far from our modern idea of the king as being a totalitarian ruler, the king is in fact the divine representation of goodness, of justice, of order, and he is the one responsible for bringing these things to the community. And to the extent that he accomplishes this, he is considered to be a just, noble, good ruler. If the king fails in this way, he must be removed from his position. just as Bress must be removed as king for capitulating to the Fomorians. I'd like to give a big thanks to my Patreon subscribers. Even just a few dollars a month really helps this channel and helps me a great deal personally. Gur mila maget as éisteach agus marigoni seas go hard.